Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet Preview Series presented by OTGBasketball.com. Make sure you follow OTG on Twitter at OTGBasketball. Also hit that subscribe button. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me today, my guy, Jonathan Ebrahimi. What's up, John?
Hey, Nick. Thanks for having me on again. We're getting close to the start of the NBA season, so let's get talking.
Yeah, close to the start of the season, close to the end of the rankings. And the top three today coming in is number 3, the San Antonio Spurs. Before we talk about the ranking, let's talk about the Spurs from last season. We mentioned a little bit off air, a ton of winning in this history. I believe this is like their 18th straight season with 50 wins. So what were your thoughts on this team last year?
I believe it or not, I mean, it's just kind of weird coming or I guess this is a weird way to describe a Spurs team, but I actually think this Spurs team overachieved a little. With the loss of Tim Duncan, I thought that was going to have a more profound impact on them than it actually did. But Kawhi stepped up his game. Pop system, as always, managed to, somehow ground together one of the best records in the conference. And, who knows what would have happened with this team if Kawhi didn't go down to the playoffs.
Yeah, honestly, you said it. I think this team did overachieve a little bit. Going to the season, I didn't think they'd win 60 games. And winning 60 games in the West is no joke, and they did that. And like you said, Kawhi took it to another level. He hit that superstar level last year. Offensively, he was a monster. Defensively, he did his thing. But you mentioned it, going down in the playoffs, that really hurt. If Kawhi was healthy in that series, what do you think would have happened? I don't think the Spurs would have won, but maybe they push it 6 or 7.
I don't know that they would have pushed at 6 or 7. A lot of people seem to think that, with Kawhi in the lineup, they were going to push the Warriors a little bit more and maybe give them a run for their money. But, I mean, I think that first game was a bit of an anomaly. They were up big, but we've seen the Spurs, that exact team blow a lead, a 20-point lead to the Warriors in the regular season. And so I don't know. I don't necessarily think that they would have gone 6 or 7. I think if they managed to pull out that game and win, which, I mean, to be honest, it wasn't a foregone conclusion. But if they did win that game, I think the Warriors still would have closed it in 5. Maybe I'll give you 6, but I don't think it would have been much of a series, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the argument you could make from the Warriors' perspective is, I think in that first half against the Spurs, the Warriors played one of their worst halves of the season. And, they didn't shoot well at all, and that's something you're not going to see consistently from a Golden State team. So maybe you're right. It was kind of just like a little bit of a fluke. But it would have still been nice to see the Warriors, actually have to compete a little bit. And if they did lose game 1, we would at least have a little excitement, but so much for that.
Yeah, and it does kind of hurt them as well, the Warriors as well, because, I mean, how many players have gone down against them in the playoffs? Over the years, yeah, they managed to get it done against Cleveland in the finals, and in Cleveland were fully healthy. But how many over the last few years, over their little championship run that they've been on for the last 3 years, how many times has the best player on the opposing team gone down?
Yeah, it's very true, or at least been banged up in some capacity. Or at least one of, you just look at it, there's been so many guys that have gone down. And it sucks too, because like you mentioned from the Warriors perspective, is like, in most cases, I think the Warriors would have beaten pretty much all of these teams. But just the fact that they were down, people can kind of use that as, they got there on a weekend competition. So, but
Absolutely.
I think an interesting thing about the Spurs is, we talk Warriors and everybody's trying to compete with the Warriors. The Warriors are playing at one of the fastest paces in the league, where the Spurs, on the other hand, are 27th out of 30th in pace, number 1 in defensive rating, and they kind of slow it down and try to beat you up a little bit.
Well, how the old saying goes, accuracy beats speed, right? The team is run so efficiently that they don't have to have a ton of possessions. They don't have to get out and run. They don't have to hit you early in the shot clock. This team can slow the pace down, look for the right shot, wait until they find the open man, and then execute their play. But with the Warriors, it just doesn't seem to matter whether they take shots early in the shot clock or late in the shot clock. That team's just on a different level. But with the Spurs, everything that they do is based around efficiency, is based around analytics, is based around putting guys in position where they're the strongest and waiting for the ball to move to get them in their sweet spots.
Yeah, very true. Like Popovich just does a great job of getting his guys in position to succeed, and that's all you can do as a coach. But biggest highlight of the Spurs season last year?
I think the biggest highlight for me was just the the play of Kawhi Leonard and him taking that next step, because I know a lot of people the previous year, so that was Kawhi Leonard's coming out party. That's him kind of taking the next step, and I hadn't bought in yet, because I was obviously still Tim Duncan's team, regardless of what the statistics said. That was his team, and I think this previous season, he stepped up. He improved his points per game. He improved his assists per game, and I think the team became his last year. So I would say, the fact that we've kind of seen him become a superstar, that MVP caliber player, that's where we can say that they had their highlight.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think, like you said, Kawhi took another step in that, in terms of, this became his team. There was down to 2 minute stretch, there was plays where Kawhi was hitting jump shots on one end, making plays in ISO situations, and then blocking shots on the other end. So like, he carried his team to a couple W's, and he was really in. It sucks for Kawhi is like James Harden and Russell Westbrook have historic seasons. In most cases, Kawhi probably would have been, at least had a good chance to win the MVP award. But last year, he just had to go up against two monsters. So I think, if I was a Spurs fan, looking at Kawhi, and I think there's probably still some more improvements he could make and really become one of these elite players in the league like he already is. Disappointment. What do you think was the biggest disappointment for the Spurs?
Well, I hate to go back to this, but I think the biggest disappointment was how the season ended. When your best player rolls his ankle in the playoffs, and then you proceed to get swept. I think that's always going to be a big disappointment. If we're going off of something else, if we're gonna maybe choose a different route to go, I think perhaps the play of Kyle Anderson is another big disappointment. Not that I have anything against Kyle Anderson; he's a nice player, but I think the Spurs were kind of hoping that his development would be much further along by now.
Yeah, they wanted him to take another step in his game. He hasn't really taken a jump yet. He's shown flashes, but it's not the consistency that they want to see. Like you said, I think you could easily go with Zaza Pachulia here taking out Kawhi's ankle. But I'm going to go with LaMarcus Aldridge. I thought in the postseason he really let them down. He had a good game here or there, but there was, times where he was getting out-rebounded by Steph Curry, Kevin Durant in the paint, and he just did not look good in the postseason.
Yeah, I think LaMarcus Aldridge is just not cut out for a system like what they have in San Antonio. He kind of needs to be the center of attention. He needs to have the ball where he wants the ball. He doesn't like moving without the ball. He likes to get the ball, and that's just not how Pop plays. That's just not how he designs his offense, and I think it really bothers Aldridge. And I don't think he has a very strong personality in the sense that he could kind of just, get on with it, go out and play hard. I think that type of thing wears on him a little bit.
Yeah, he feels like he needs to get the ball more and things along those lines. I know there was a lot of talk this year about LaMarcus, requesting a trade, and then Pop and LaMarcus kind of, hashing it out and talking about it like recently. So we'll see what happens with that situation. Would not surprise me if his name is included in trade rumors at some point this season, but that's for another day. Ranking wise, Spurs are coming in at number 3. Do you think that's a fair ranking? Too high, too low? What are your thoughts on that?
I think based on the evidence that we have, I think it's a fair ranking. We've got a lot of teams that have improved over the offseason, Oklahoma City, Houston, a lot of teams that have gotten significantly better, but we haven't seen them play yet. So it's difficult to put them over a team that is almost guaranteed to win, 60 games every season, regardless of who's on the roster. So I think number 3 is probably the most appropriate place to put them.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on the Rockets pod. The Spurs, you kind of have to give them a little respect because, like you said, every year they're winning games, they're making the postseason, and Pop always pulls out some player that you never heard of, and all of a sudden he's a solid contributor off the bench for this team. So I think 3 is pretty solid. I mean, based off of talent and on paper, like you said, it's hard to make this judgment. I might drop them a few spots, but until we see, the other teams on the court, it's tough to make the argument.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, the talent scouting on that team is world class. So even when it seems like they've got a thin roster, someone will be picked up from Croatia or Serbia, and they'll be put into the NBA rotation, and all of a sudden they're a mini star.
Yeah, and then they'll just be like dropping 5 threes in the playoffs in a big situation. No big deal. That's just kind of how the Spurs roll. But let's talk offseason a little bit. Let's talk draft. Obviously, Spurs don't have a high pick being so successful, but they drafted number 29. They pick up Derek White, a guard that can play both positions. What are your thoughts on him, and what do you think the Spurs are going to do with him?
I think that's where the that's where the Spurs are most thin, and I think they kind of have to look to the future in terms of what they're going to do at that guard position, because when you've got your three best guards are all 30 plus years old, you kind of have to start looking towards the future. So Derek White's a nice player. I kind of see him more as a shooting guard than a point guard, but he does have a handle, which is important. Again, they're really just looking towards developing the guards that they're going to be replacing him. He was a lower pick. I don't know too much about him, and I don't want to say too much about his game before I actually get a chance to see him play in an NBA setting. But I mean, he looks promising.
Yeah, and honestly, anybody the Spurs draft, there's a reason they drafted them. So you always have confidence in their player development. And like you said, they're trying to add some more talent to this team. Like for me, it almost feels like, no, I wouldn't say a retool year, but like I don't know if the Spurs are like all in on going for a championship this year because they kind of realize what's going on. We'll talk about that in a little bit. They also picked up Jerron Blossom game in late second round. I believe he signed a G League deal, so he's probably not going to see much NBA action this year. But moving on to free agent signings, they did re-sign Patty Mills, which was a big deal. There's a lot of talk about him going elsewhere. Also, Pau Gasol opted out, and he ended up returning. What are your thoughts on these two coming back?
Well, for the Pau Gasol deal, I I like that for both parties. I think Pau's a perfect type of player to fit in that system. He doesn't mind coming off the bench. He doesn't mind starting. He can do it all. He can play two different positions. He's a highly skilled individual, high basketball IQ. I think he's a perfect fit. He's a little bit older, but as long as he's got a guy like Pop managing his minutes, it'll help prolong his career a little bit. Patty Mills, I was surprised. I really was surprised to see them re-sign him, just on the fact that he has kind of had to take a backseat role to Tony Parker, regardless of how Tony Parker's played over the last couple of seasons. There's been long stretches where Patty Mills has been the better of the two, and he hasn't been rewarded with a starting position or more playing time. So I wonder if that's maybe part of what lured him back to the Spurs, is maybe the promise that Tony's going to start winding down his career over the next year or two, and maybe pass those keys over to Patty Mills.
Yeah, I agree, because Patty Mills probably going to free agency. There was a few teams that might take a shot at him and give him a chance to start. So I think the Spurs had to convince him in some way. Obviously, San Antonio does a great job in that, and winning a ton of games always helps. You mentioned the Pau Gasol re-signing. Did you think that the contract was a little bit high at $16 million a year?
On the surface, it looks high, but when you kind of take a step back and think about it, they need to pay somebody that money. And a guy like Pau Gasol, who has had such a great career, who has been a consummate professional, who can provide so much leadership and so much intangibles to the young guys coming into this squad, it's a short contract, and unless they were planning on making a big trade or making a big signing, that money's got to go to somebody. So why not give it to somebody as respectable as Pau Gasol?
Yeah, I don't mind paying Gasol. I just probably would. I think it's a 3-year deal. I probably would have been happier with maybe a 1 or 2 year deal. Just because I wouldn't want to pay him $16 million when he's, I think, almost 40 years old. But Spurs, I don't know. They got something up their sleeve. They don't ever really do anything like that unless they have a reason for it. Who knows? It could end up being, I think we mentioned this maybe on the Toronto pod. That could be an expiring contract at the point when it's the last year of the deal and the cap's going to tighten up a little bit and expiring, so you're going to go back to having good value.
Yeah, and you never know. They may want him to play longer on a discounted contract. So maybe they're just paying paying him his money now, so that his last few years he'll kind of pull a Tim Duncan and take a deep discount.
Yeah, I could see that. He's a smart guy and he's made plenty of money in his career. But let's talk about new free agent signings. They picked up Rudy Gay. This was somewhat a surprise. There wasn't really a ton of traction for Rudy Gay in free agency. Were you surprised he signed with San Antonio?
I'm not surprised that Rudy Gay would sign with San Antonio. I'm surprised San Antonio would want to sign Rudy Gay. He seems like the antithesis of what they want to do in San Antonio. He's one of the most inefficient players that play at his level. Because granted, he is a talented guy. He is a good player, but he's got a very low basketball IQ. and he's very inefficient. And I think that that's just the opposite of what San Antonio generally want to do, and what they're looking for in a player. So I was really surprised, but you never know. He seems to be at a point in his career where he's just struck out at every stop, and maybe he's ready to sit down and listen more so than try and be the guy that kind of flared out in 3 different cities.
Yeah, and maybe he realizes, I need to win. He hasn't really had any real success. Obviously, with Memphis, they won some playoff games, but it's not like they had any deep runs. He's never really been to a championship game. So,
well, the interesting thing about his time in Memphis was that their best playoff run was the season he was injured and didn't play.
Yeah, and then you look at Toronto. When he left, things really started to click. So, you hate to say it about a player. We say it about Dwight, too, is things got better maybe after they left. So we'll see what happens. So Popovich can really transform guys. And they could and it'll be interesting to see Rudy Gay, how he returns from that torn Achilles. Because I was going to say they could use some athleticism on the Spurs, but it's going to be hard to get your jump back after that type of injury.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that he's now on the wrong side of 30. So, I mean, this could go either way. I hope. It's a nice fit, and Rudy Gay is a nice player. He's got all the tools. It just doesn't seem to ever come together. But I hope for both sides that they can work something out.
Yeah, this could be a really good move for them if it does work out, if they're able to get the best out of him, because you could play him at that stretch 4 and kind of be able to match up a little better with some of these small ball teams. The Spurs also made another pickup. They picked up Joffrey Laverne, and this kind of seems like one of the ideal Spurs guys. Somebody who hasn't really done much, international guy. The Spurs picked him up, and he's going to have a big season.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he's shown flashes of of talent in his previous 3 stops, so he's kind of bounced around a little bit. He's never really been able to kind of anchor down solid minutes, but he seems, like you said, he seems exactly what the Spurs look for. A player with talent that just maybe hasn't had an opportunity to showcase it. For whatever reason, they seem to love international players, and Laverne being from France kind of fits that description. So we'll see with Laverne. I mean, there's not going to be a ton of minutes at the 4 and the 5, but
definitely be interesting to see what happens with him. So, but like we said, it's a Spurs guy.
He's a 7-footer who can shoot threes, and realistically, that seems like the way the league's going. So, if you were going to ask me if Greg Popovich can find a place in the rotation for a 7-foot Frenchman who can shoot from distance, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That's exactly what he could use.
So we'll see what happens with him this year. They also picked up a few G League guys. We're not going to talk about them. We'll talk to Parchers, though. They lost Joel Anthony, Dwayne Dedman, David Lee, Jonathan Simmons. He didn't really play much, but Dedman, that's a pretty solid loss right there. He was really efficient off the bench for them defensively.
Yeah, I don't think Dedman gets enough credit for the way he plays. He's kind of got an old school game where he's big, bruising, big man in the paint. Like I said, though, they've got depth at that position. I don't think they'll miss him too much. They will miss the toughness, that interior toughness, because guys like Pau Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge, they're not exactly going to put a beating on their opponents in the paint. So I think they'll miss that interior defense, that toughness on the inside. But again, they're a deep team. I think they'll be fine without him. Jonathan Simmons, on the other hand, I think that was it was a shame that they didn't somehow find a way to keep him on the roster. He really played well last season. He's a great story, a guy who could have easily given up on his dream and walked away from the sport, but he kept at it, and then all of a sudden, arguably the the most talked about player last season for portions of it, at least. He had flashes of brilliance, some big games. People were comparing him to Kawhi Leonard throughout the season. So it's a shame that they didn't find a way to hold on to him.
Yeah, and it wasn't like he signed a huge contract with Orlando either. So that was kind of interesting. But I liked what he brought to the team last year. Like you said, great story, working his way up from the G League. And he just kind of gave the Spurs that extra energy, that athleticism that they needed, especially for a team that was slow last year. He was a nice piece to have. They also lost David Lee. He played some pretty good minutes for them last year, but I think they'll be able to handle that loss.
Yeah, again, he kind of still David Lee fits the same mold as Gasol and Aldridge do. So he was kind of surplus goods at that point.
Give me your opening night starting lineup.
I would have to go with Tony Parker, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Pau Gasol.
Yeah, I think that's probably what they'll likely go with. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they change it at some point and put Rudy Gay at the 4 and start that lineup of Parker Green, Kawhi, Gay, LaMarcus Aldridge. But that would probably be something later in the season. I think the one that you win with is probably opening night. What do you think would be, like the best lineup, the best death lineup this team could throw out there that could match up with the Warriors?
That could match up with the Warriors, or would be the best against the Warriors?
Like the best against the Warriors in terms of like a small ball lineup.
See, that's why I asked that question, because if they're going to run a small ball lineup and try and keep up with the Warriors, then I would get rid of Tony Parker. I'd put Patty Mills. I would put Danny Green, Rudy Gay, Kawhi Leonard, and LaMarcus Aldridge. But I don't think that's their best lineup against the Warriors. I think something more along the lines of Patty Mills, Rudy Gay at shooting guard, Kawhi at small forward, LaMarcus Aldridge at power forward, and Pau Gasol at center. I think a lineup with as much height and length as possible would be their best bet against the Warriors. Kind of just slow them down, beat on them a little bit.
The opposite of what they play. I get it.
And get a lot of buckets in the paint, but at least have, shooting at every position, because both Gasol and Aldridge can shoot from behind the arc. So you've got shooting at all 5 positions. You have defense at most of the positions, and you have talent at all 5 positions. But most of all, you have height and length at every single position.
I think one of the most important things for the Spurs is, if Rudy Gay is able to come back healthy, that could give Pop a really nice versatile piece. He could throw him out there in a different couple ways. So I think that'll be interesting. I agree with you. I think the small ball lineup, if you went with it, would probably be Patty Mills, Green, Kawhi, Gay, and Aldridge. Maybe Laverne and some other lineups, or maybe they get really small and they play like Kyle Anderson or something at the center position, depending on the matchup. I think this year we're going to see a ton of small ball lineups. I know I mentioned that to you like way back on probably pod, like I think the Detroit Piston pod. But, I think this is going to be a fun season in terms of lineup versatility across the league.
Well, I mean, if you want to really push the envelope with the Spurs, you could do a lineup with Patty Mills, Manu Ginobili, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, and Rudy Gay. Because Rudy Gay, I mean,
he's big.
He's 230 pounds, 6'8". I mean, he matches up with Draymond a little bit in terms of size. Now, he would have to, play the best defense of his life for that lineup to be competitive. But he's about the same. He's actually probably a little bit bigger than Draymond. Whether or not that that size translates to the right type of strength and the right type of grit would be the question. But I mean, a lineup like that, I don't know if that hurts them. I think that's kind of the way that that the Warriors have been playing with Durant and Draymond at the 4 and at the 5. So I like that lineup against them.
Yeah, that could actually be really interesting. And then Ginobili's still able to put some effort on the court this year and, still have a little bit in the tank. I think that could be something they could throw out there. I like that Gay and Green matchup you mentioned. Then you throw Kawhi on KD, then Danny Green on either Steph or Klay Thompson, and then whoever else you want, try to mix and match around that. But starting lineup, who's breaking out? This is a tough one, honestly.
It is a tough one. Well, I'm going to cancel out LaMarcus and Pau Gasol because I think if anything they're just going to decline further. Tony Parker, same thing. Danny Green is kind of who he is. I don't think he's going to make much of an impact this season. So I'm going to go with Kawhi Leonard, and I'm going to say, this is a good opportunity for him to really break into that superstar threshold and maybe win an MVP this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kawhi's pretty much the only choice. Like you said, the other guys, I don't really know if they can get much better. Kawhi can still get better. We've seen he improved his game every year. And, he could have a real shot at MVP this year just because some of the other guys are tied up with new stars on their team.
Yeah, if you really sit back and think about it, him and LeBron James are the only two players that are really threats to win MVP that don't have another, superstar caliber player on their team. I know LeBron's got Wade on his squad now, but I mean Wade's far past his prime, and Isaiah Thomas is probably only good for about half the season. So I mean, I think the award really comes down to those two guys.
Yeah, it should be a really interesting, and there'll probably be one guy that pops up out of nowhere that has a really good season too. And obviously the guys in the big teams probably get some recognition, but going to the season, Kawhi and LeBron definitely have a really good shot at it. Who's breaking out on the bench though?
Again, this is a tough one because with the Spurs roster, they all play their role so well. I don't see too many guys, jumping up that high or jumping that far out. But I want to say Patty Mills. I really like his game. I think he's been overlooked for a long portion of his career. He had a good year last year, 10 points, 4 assists, shot over 40% from the 3-point line. So I think there's a lot more he can contribute to this team with a few added minutes. I mean, he only played about 20 minutes a game last season. And if you look at his, per 36 numbers, we're looking at a guy who's putting up 16 points and 6 assists. Like he's a great talent, and I think that the Spurs can use a little bit more of him based on how the game's going, and that kind of space and pace offense is kind of taking hold.
Yeah, and he's one of the guys on the Spurs team that can get hot from three, and that's something you need in the NBA now. I think, like you mentioned earlier, I think he could have a bigger role this season, and I think they could try to get him a few more shots. I'm going to go with Dejounte Murray. I liked what I saw from him last year. He's shown some nice flashes. I think they could play him a little bit with Patty Mills because he has some length to him. So I think that's a guy to keep an eye on. Also, I'm going to give 2, and I think Joffrey Laverne, we mentioned him before, he just seems like a perfect fit in this Spurs system, and I just think that he'll have success as well.
Yeah, just going back to Dejounte Murray, I really like his game. He's very long at the point guard position. He can shoot. He's got a nice handle. He's got all the tools to be great, so hopefully he can put it together this year.
Yeah, and they could really use him, and that could be a nice boost. So, but let's talk wins. Best case scenario win-wise for the Spurs, and best case scenario playoff-wise. Like, what's the farthest they can get in the postseason?
I think best case scenario win-wise, we're looking at another 60 to 62 wins this year for the Spurs. I don't think they're going to do too much better than that. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't even, looking at this roster, I wouldn't even predict 60 wins for this team if they hadn't just done it the previous year and countless times before that. So I'm going to give them the respect and say about 60 wins for them. In the playoffs, their best bet is probably their best run will probably take them to the Western Conference Finals. I don't see this team beating the Warriors, just like I don't see anybody beating the Warriors at this point. But I think that's their best case scenario: a 60-win season, maybe finish second in the conference, and they'll bow out in the conference finals.
Yeah, like you said, this team just gets like the respect from the previous years. Like looking at the roster, I don't know if I can give them best case scenario 60 wins. I look at, the other teams, but then you think, Popovich. So I think best case for me is probably like 56, 58 wins. And like you said, Western Conference Finals. I don't think they can beat Golden State. I don't even know if they can get a game from Golden State this year. Who would be your biggest threat to knock off the Warriors in the West? Your top 3 threats.
Top 3 would be OKC and probably the Spurs. I don't like this roster at all, but there's something about Greg Popovich and some of the things he's been able to pull over the last, 10 seasons where you just kind of have to say, well, something that I don't know about these guys.
Yeah, he always, and obviously I think he's sick of losing to the Warriors. He wants to beat them, and obviously being a great coach, that's what it's about. For me, I would agree. I'd probably say Houston, OKC, San Antonio. What are your thoughts on a team like, I don't think Minnesota could beat them, but how would you think they'd match up against a team like Golden State?
Well, they definitely have all of the things you need to compete with them. They've got a really good point guard that'll keep Steph busy. It's not like they can switch Clay onto Teague because then you've got Steph Curry on either Andrew Wiggins or Jimmy Butler, which would just be a disaster. So I think one of the keys to beating that team is making sure Steph has to work defensively, and that's something that they've been able to avoid for a great amount of their matchups in the postseason. So I think that part kind of added to the fact that they have arguably the best big man in basketball. I know a lot of people like to think, that title should go to DeMarcus Cousins or Anthony Davis. But I think with the package that Karl Anthony Towns brings, his ability to stay on the floor is what separates him from a guy like Anthony Davis. And then it's just his overall offensive, defensive, inside, outside, perfect game is what separates him from a guy like DeMarcus Cousins. So I think Karl Anthony Towns this year is going to be the best big man in basketball. I think that's extremely tough on the Warriors because if you put Draymond on Karl Anthony Towns, I just don't think he has the size to stick with him. And then if you put a guy like Kevin Durant on him, I think it's just going to wear Kevin Durant out. So I think that's a tough matchup for Warriors as well. And then their wings are as tough as nails. I think having Jimmy Butler on the squad is going to do wonders for Andrew Wiggins on the defensive side. I think having this caliber of player on his squad is going to really push Andrew Wiggins to be as good as he can and put in the effort on the defensive side. We know it's not a talent issue. We know it's an effort issue. He's, a 6'8", massive frame, ridiculously athletic. He should be great on the defensive side, and I think he will be with the addition of Jimmy Butler and Taj Gibson to add to that. So I think they have all of the tools to be a team that competes with Golden State. It'll just be whether or not they put it together.
Yeah, honestly, I love Cat going to the season. I agree with you. I think there's a good chance he could end up, the best big man this year.
He's my dark horse for the MVP. I know they've got a lot of talent on that team, and I know they probably won't win, 60 games. But if they can win 50 or so games and maybe finish with a top 5 seed, I don't see any reason why he can't win MVP if he played the way he played last season.
Yeah, and if he pops those numbers up a little bit in a few areas, it could be really close. But back to the Spurs. Worst case scenario for the Spurs, win-wise and playoff-wise.
I refuse to go below 50 wins for this team. I don't think Pop will allow this team to lose more than 50 games. Even when Kawhi Leonard was out last season, he missed 6 games. The Spurs went 5-1 without him, and I think that's his biggest hurdle in terms of winning MVP is that he's going to make sure he doesn't miss a lot of games, because if he misses a lot of games and the Spurs go 7-1 or 5-1 or 4-0 with him on the bench, that doesn't look good in terms of how much value he brings to the squad. So I think that this team system is good enough to kind of withstand any injuries that could pop up. Obviously, if Kawhi goes down early and is out for the season, that'll derail their entire year. But I think 50 is about the worst that it gets for this squad.
I'm going to break it, John. I'm going to break it. I think they're going to, at worst case scenario, I think they could finish under 50. I think if Kawhi goes down, like for any extended stretch, I know, like you said, if he misses 3 or 4 games, they can survive. But I think last year they put a lot more pressure on Kawhi to be the guy, and he did a lot more out of the system than usual. They ran a lot more ISOs last season, so I think if Kawhi went down, that would really hurt them. They'll still get in the playoffs, but I don't think they'd win 50. And I think with the town out west, if they maybe landed like a 4 seed and they had a matchup with one of these young and upcoming teams, I think they could get knocked out in the first round.
See, I can't bring myself to do it because this Spurs team has proven to me that they can win regardless of who's on the floor. I mean, they won 5 of the 6 games Kawhi missed. So their winning percentage was actually better without Kawhi than it was with them. Now, granted, it was only a 6-game stretch, and I'm by no means saying that team is better without Kawhi. But they just find a way to win, and Greg Popovich does a great job of covering up his squad's weaknesses, especially in short spurts. So I think I think you're right. If Kawhi misses more than 10 games, there's a chance they'll lose less than 50 games. But unless he's missing a significant period of time, this is a 50-win squad. You can probably put that in pen.
Yeah, I think so. If they're healthy and everything goes right, and Rudy Gay is healthy too, I think 50 wins is definitely. But worst case, it would be if Kawhi was hurt, or even some maybe even Patty Mills I think will have a pretty big impact this year. They could be hurt if they lose him for an extended period of time. But realistically, what do you expect to happen this year?
Well, I don't expect a lot of injuries in this squad. They're so well managed and so well coached. Minutes are always kept to a tight restriction with Pop. So I think they'll probably win somewhere between 56 and 60 games.
I'm a little bit lower. I think I have them around 54. I think the talent out west is just going to make it a little bit more difficult than years past. Because I mean, if you look at the top five, the top six teams out west, they're really good. So I think this year they're going to be a little bit closer to 50 than 60. But playoff wise, what do you think is going to happen? Second round knockout, Western Conference Finals, what?
I think this team's getting bounced in the second round, and the reason I say that is because I just think there's too much talent, individual talent, on some of the other squads like Houston and OKC. So whichever team they match up with in the second round, whether it's the Warriors, Rockets, or the Thunder, I think they lose to any of those teams because when the playoffs come and the rotations become a little bit more top heavy, you kind of have to play your stars for extended amounts of time. And I don't really trust the Spurs roster outside of Kawhi Leonard, and I think that's what'll hurt them.
Yeah, I agree. I think second round knockout is the most likely scenario. But talking about it, thinking about that second round of the Western Conference is going to be really fun. That's a lot of good matchups over there. But let's talk the truth. And today for my emoji, I'm going with, the smiley face that has no mouth. And this is Kawhi Leonard. No emotion. He did smile this offseason, but he's stern as they come. He doesn't really express himself on the court. It's just get the job done. And then also I have the family picture, 4 people there, because I think if the Spurs are going to be successful like they have, it's going to be a team effort. Kawhi's going to have to do a lot, but a lot of the other guys are going to have to step up in other departments.
I like that. I like those two choices. For mine, I'm going to go with the similar to yours. I'm going to go with the smiley, but where its mouth is just a straight line. And that's Greg Popovich. That's his face 90% of the time, and that's also my face at the end of every season when they win another 60 wins with arguably the worst roster in the Western Conference.
Yeah, it's crazy, and that's a good one. Pop's always like that, and he's never really happy. Even when the team's up 30, he'll still be giving someone shit for not getting back on defense. But league pass wise, where do you put the Spurs at 1 out of 10?
Realistically, we should be putting this team, close to 10 at least. I mean, they play perfect textbook basketball. Kawhi Leonard is an absolute stud. He's a lot of fun to watch. And I still, for some reason, I can't find it in my heart to watch these guys play basketball. It's draining. It's boring. Their jerseys are ugly. Their home court is ugly. Their fans are a pain in the ass. I don't like watching the Spurs play basketball. So I'm going to put them at around a 7. I think that's being generous because I really like Kawhi Leonard's game. I love some of the the highlight plays that he has where he's blocking a shot on one side of the court and then sprinting down and doing a behind the back dunk on the other side. So I'm going to put them at a 7, but there's just something about the Spurs that puts me off it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy too, is because I do enjoy ball movement and good, basketball. But I'm going to agree. I'm going to go with 7 out of 10. And the reason that I'm going to probably watch the most, like you said, Kawhi, getting the block on one end, dunking on the other end, getting the team the W down the stretch. And like we said, there could be an MVP storyline for him this season. So that's always something fun to keep an eye on. But you'd watch the Spurs over what TV show that you like?
Again, this is a tough one because I don't really like watching the Spurs play basketball. I started watching a show recently called Ozark, and it's a Netflix original, and it is actually quite interesting. But I haven't been able to fully get into it yet, and I think that would be the show I watch it over. I'm afraid that once I start getting really deep into that show, I'll be watching that over the Spurs as well.
Yeah, I heard that it is a really good show. I haven't given it a shot yet, but I'll probably start at some point. I'm going to go with another Netflix original. I mean, I do like this show, but I also do like the Spurs. I'm going to go with Narcos. And I thought it's a great show, but, the Spurs are also a great basketball team, like we said, and they win 50 games for almost 20 years now.
You know, I thought about putting Narcos, but I would be lying if I said I'd rather watch. It depends who the Spurs are playing, right? It depends.
Yeah.
It depends who the Spurs are playing. If they were playing the Warriors or the Cavs, I'd probably watch it over Narcos. But if they were playing the Bucks or the Hawks, I probably would stick with Narcos. I really like that show.
And then also you got to worry about the Spurs playing all their starters, not randomly giving 3 guys a night off.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a huge problem. Well, I mean, maybe we won't see much of that this season. Although something tells me Pop has no issue sitting guys regardless of what the schedule looks like.
Exactly. I know there's supposed to be something about that Adam Silver mentioned, but there's definitely ways around it. But that wraps up for today, Jonathan. As always, thank you for hopping on, and as always, thank you everybody for listening.
Thanks, Nick. It's always a pleasure. I'll see you next time.